Hello everyone, welcome to our time of sermon preparation. This is an opportunity for us to look at the readings the church gives us to be more open on Sunday to God's Word, working in us, challenging us, and leading us to a greater understanding of who Jesus is. And that's what this Sunday is about in many ways, the revelation of Jesus. So let's keep that in mind as we look at our readings for this Sunday. The first reading is taken from the second book of Samuel, chapter 7, verses 1 to 5, and then verses 8 to 12, and then verses 14 and 16. The responsorial psalm is Psalm 89. The second reading is taken from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 16, verses 25 to 27. And the gospel comes from the infancy narrative of Luke's gospel, chapter 1, verses 26 to 38. As I said, this Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Advent, year B, seems to be speaking to us about the revelation of Jesus, who Jesus is. The early church, the early Christians, needed to understand who Jesus was for themselves, but also for those who they were going out to proclaim Jesus to. There needed to be a reason for their faith in Jesus. They needed to explain why they thought Jesus was so important. And so they needed to know who Jesus was. Of course, we also need to know who Jesus is. Who is Jesus in my life? Why do I follow him? So we have a similar need. Generally, when we, modern Catholic Christians, need to know who Jesus is, we go to the New Testament. But of course, the early church, the early Christians, didn't have the New Testament with them, a nice Bible that they could carry around with them. They had to go to the Old Testament to find out who Jesus was. And so the early church looked through the Old Testament for hints as to who Jesus was. And our first reading about David and his household was an important aha moment for the early church, because they suddenly realized, perhaps the Psalm 89 gave them a clue, they realized that this crucified Messiah, this crucified Jesus, was the fulfillment of the Davidic Messiah they had been longing for. Jesus was of David's line. He was of David's household. And they had been looking for a king. Here was the king from David's house. A different king, sure, but nevertheless a king and the Messiah. And so the Old Testament reading for this Sunday gives us a clue, a hint of who Jesus is. He is the fulfillment of the promises of God. God promised to make David's line live forever. And here now, Jesus was achieving that. So that's why this reading from the second book of Samuel is so important. But you might be asking yourself, it doesn't seem to link all that well with the gospel. Previously, in our time of sermon preparation, we have spoken about the link between the Old Testament and the Gospel. But so often the link is very clear and obvious, but perhaps it's not so clear and obvious for us this Sunday. Why was the reading from the first book of Chronicles not used? Because that reading has echoes of the Annunciation. And that's what the Gospel is about. The angel Gabriel coming to Mary to announce the birth of Jesus. An unusual announcement, an unusual birth. But it's hinted at in the first book of Chronicles. You could also say, but yeah, there are lots of other announcements of unusual births in the Old Testament. Why wasn't one of those used? For example, the announcement of Isaac's birth, of Solomon's birth, of Samuel's birth, of John the Baptist's birth. Those surely would have linked nicely and clearly with the Gospel. But if we remember that these readings are about the revelation of who God is, God's love for us, his faithfulness to his promises, then we begin to see that there is a link. God is faithful. God fulfills his promises. Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises made to King David. When we start to think like that, then we see a little bit better the link between the first reading from the Old Testament and the Gospel. The second reading, taken from the letter to the Romans, is again about revelation. Almost sort of like a crime, mystery, thriller sort of revelation. Jesus is revealed to the nations as God's great mystery. God working in mystery reveals himself. So that sort of comes out in St. Paul's letter to the Romans. As I said, the Gospel is the famous story, we know it so well, of the Annunciation of the birth of Jesus by the angel Gabriel. It is really now the start of the Christmas story, isn't it? From here we as Christmas rushes towards us, we grow in understanding how Jesus came to be born. And so as we read this gospel reading, we know that the promise, the Annunciation, will be fulfilled. For God so loved the world that he sent his Son. And perhaps that's the background for us in the parish this Sunday. This Sunday of Advent is traditionally the Sunday of love. And if we can see that God's love is always with us and has been from Old Testament times, from the beginning of the world, we see that Jesus is a revelation of God's love. God so loved the world, he sent his Son to be with us. So there's some thoughts, maybe a bit jumbled this Thursday afternoon, but I hope they help you to prepare for the fourth Sunday of Advent. I look forward to having you with us. Take care, God bless, and most of all, be safe. Bye-bye.